right, let's fire this engine up and see how it sounds. What was that? Let's try it again. Oh man, we got a real problem here, folks. Well, does anybody want to venture a guess as to what may be wrong here? It could be something serious. We've got it in the shop. You know, I'm poking around here and I'm not seeing anything obvious from right here, although I always do this anyway. I pull the dipstick and there's no oil in the engine. So, oops, that's not a good sign, right? There's coolant in the reservoir tank over there, but I'm not picking up anything in the engine. We're going to put this up in the air and take a look and see exactly what's going on. Take a look underneath this engine. You see anything weird there? Look at that. Look at that hole, not only in the pan, but in the side of the block. Watch as we start to turn the engine over with a socket on the front crank bolt. Oh, this is probably the worst I've ever seen. The connecting rod broke in half, and the piston is actually stuck up at the top of the chamber. Look at that. So the engine's turning over, but the reason it stopped on us is because it comes up and that rod hits at the wrong place. It's not going to turn over. So this is what you call a catastrophic engine failure. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, there's not much more that can be said about that problem. Now, there are a couple comments that I would like to make. Number one, if you should have something happen to you like this with your own Mercedes, particularly the diesel, if you get that loud banging and clanging noise, you might want to save your money and not take it off to a shop to have them check it over. I've seen this so many times. Usually on these catastrophic engine failures, you're going to have it towed to some shop. The guy's going to spend some time and then tell you that it's not repairable and you're going to have to spend $300 or $400 plus tow fees if you don't have a AAA. So I highly recommend, if you're having a problem like this, you get a really bad clanging noise, maybe just have the tow truck tow it to your house. I think you wouldn't need a mechanic. If you got under the car and used a flashlight, also you'd have oil all over under the car too, and you know, it's not going to take $300 or $400 of diagnosis to tell you that you're going to need a replacement engine. Now, one thing I want to caution you, if you should have any type of catastrophic failure with your older Mercedes engine, I don't care if it's a gasoline engine or a diesel engine, do not, and I'm going to repeat, do not try to overhaul it. I know some of you might argue with me on this, but let me tell you, in all my years, I've seen nothing but grief from people who have tried to rebuild an engine that suffered catastrophic failure like this. And by catastrophic failure, I mean crankshaft, connecting rod, piston failure, camshaft, pistons hitting the valves, and major overheating. And when I mean major overheating, that means overheating the engine so much that the engine quits at high speed. What happens is you get into these engines, and sure you can overhaul them, but there's always collateral damage. For instance, this engine is going to have a lot of metallic particles floating all through that engine, including into the oil cooler, into that oil filter housing, and you could have some extra stresses on this engine that you're not aware of, and you go to all the expense to get new pistons and everything and overhaul it, and whoops, you're going to find out that maybe that wasn't so smart. And that's the same with an engine that's been extremely overheated. Don't expect that you can just put a head gasket on it and do a head job and go merrily on your way. A lot of times that overheating has weakened the spring tension in your piston rings. It's probably could have deformed the piston slightly, and you've got other issues that come into play, and you go to all that work to rebuild the head and install a new head gasket, you're right back at it very soon. So I recommend in a situation like this, if something like this should happen to you, start looking for a replacement used engine. Even if you want to overhaul, get a good replacement used engine that you know hasn't suffered some sort of catastrophic failure. But somebody said this is an ivory, Mercedes ivory. No, it's yellow. actually kind of a faded yellow, so it looks ivory, but this is a distinct yellow. This is a color that was available in the late 70s and early part of the 80s only. Kind of become more fond of this color. Look what I did. We got the power buffer out just for fun, because I think most of you, commented about, hey, if it's a really good body and there's no rust, then it's worth saving it. And we don't have that big rust problem here in the Northwest, but I sure feel for you people that do. But we took the power buffer and we went after this door. If you recall from the previous video, we had some pretty heavy fading in the paint, except for this front fender, which had been repainted. But now look at this. We buffed it out from here all the way to here, and then of course here you can begin to see this is faded up here. We buffed a little bit up here. What a difference. I mean, we only spent 15 minutes on this using a power buffer and some compound, and look at the difference. You stand back and now the color has depth, and I have to admit, okay, I like the color now. You'll have to admit the color kind of grows on you, right? Well, one thing I forgot to mention earlier in this video is I've had quite a few people request information on what could possibly have gone wrong with that engine. I think some people are a little afraid, like, oh no, maybe that'll happen to my engine. Well, any of us who've been around these 5-cylinder turbo diesel engines know these are one tough engine, and they don't just cough up a connecting rod. That is not common. It's not something you need to lose sleep over. But I think I could get into that engine. We'd have to tear that engine apart and maybe figure out what caused that. I mean, that's pretty bad. Can you believe this? This is the piston that came out of number 2 cylinder. I mean, I've seen bad pistons, but this is unbelievable. Look at every single piston ring is seized in the groove. We have severe scoring all the way around, just not on the skirts of the piston, but we have severe scoring all the way around, including right here by the wrist pin. Look at the chunks out between those ring grooves. And this is where the connecting rod broke, right here. It broke right at the top. It just shattered, so that the rest of the connecting rod was flying around inside the engine, and that's what made it jam up. So this is what you call catastrophic failure. But there's something interesting about this particular failure. I know some of you are going to say, oh yeah, lack of oil, oh yeah, poor maintenance. Well, let me tell you, when I took the engine apart, number 2 was the only one like this. Even the bearings on the rest of the crank were fine. So something happened that was specific to number 2 that caused this type of failure. Look at that. You can see where the piston just came up and hit the valves, of course, but we don't have a lot of damage. There was no pre-chamber failure, but this is a mystery, and I know all of you love mysteries. So let's hear from you. What do you think happened to cause this particular piston to seize up in the bore and destroy the connecting rod? Can you hear me now? Check out this sound here. It's got this loud bang, 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 and the car's shaking. You can actually feel in the front fender. Can you still hear me now? Anybody want to guess what this noise is? I'm not going to tell you.